Hi everybody! This week's topic is going to be celebrating spring. There are a lot of awesome things that happen in spring. The first thing that's one of my favorite things is the weather gets a lot nicer. It goes from winter being cold to spring being a little bit warmer so we can spend more time outside. Another really cool thing that happens in spring is baby animals are born. I love baby animals, and today's book takes place in spring. This book is called Make Way for Ducklings, and it's about a bunch of baby ducks being born in their first few months of life. It's so much fun. This book, it takes place in Boston, Massachusetts, and it's a little bit of an older book, so the pictures aren't in color, but that's okay because the pictures are really good. I think you're going to enjoy them. So we're going to read this book now. It's called Make Way for Ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on and on. So there they are flying. They're looking for a place to build their nest. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in a public garden with a little island on it. This is the very best place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So they slowed their flaps down. And this is the picture of them flying to the park. It's like they finally found a good spot. The next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. There they are fishing. Oh, there's his beak, looking for some fish. Just as they were getting ready to start their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. Good morning, quacked Mr. Mallard, to be polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts in the water. So Mr. Mallard followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast. So this is the bird that they're talking about, but it's not a real bird. It's a bird that's attached to a boat of people. So that's why the bird didn't squawk back at them. I like this place, said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right next to this pond? There are no foxes, no turtles, and people feed us peanuts. What could be better? Good, said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at least Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But there they are in the park. But look out, squawked Mrs. Mallard. You'll get run over. And when she got her breath, she added, this is no place for babies. With those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else. Oh no. Those are that horrible thing as a kid on a bicycle. She's afraid it might be unsafe for her babies. So they flew over Beacon Hall, the round state house, and there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. No water here. Then they flew over the Charles River. This is better, quacked Mr. Mallard. That island looks like a nice, quiet place. It's only a little way from the public garden. Yes, said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. That looks just like the right place to hatch our ducklings. So there's the island that they're talking about, that they're going to have a nest at. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes. near the water and settled down to build their nest. In only just a short time from the beginning, they began to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. So they're stuck for a little bit, but it looks like she already built her nest. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Michaels called on Michael every day. There's Michael, and he's feeding them some peanuts. They're eating, so they go see him every day to get some food. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have lunch or to count the eggs to make sure they were all still there. So there's Mrs. Mallard. All of her eggs, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the 8th one is right under her foot. And there's Mr. Mallard right over there. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Knack, then Lack, then Mack, then Knack, and Uack, Pack, and Quack. Mr. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility to take care of so many ducklings, and it kept them so very busy. So there's all of their ducklings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't see the 8th one, but he's probably around. Oh, there he is. Right under Mrs. Mallard. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. So there Mr. Mallard goes off for a swim and leaves Mrs. Mallard with all these ducklings. She taught them how to swim and dive. So there they're swimming. And he's diving. Look at him. He might be looking for a fish or something. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes, scooters, and anything with wheels. They're all in the line following their mom. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Knack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Uack, Pack, and Quack fell into line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way onto the water, and they swam behind her on the opposite bank. There they go. A bunch of baby animals. And they waddled ashore and waddled along until they came to a highway. Oh no, they're going to have to cross the street. When Mrs. Mallard stepped out across the road, honk honk went the horns in the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard, and she thumped back again. Quack, quack, quack went Jack, Knack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Uack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. And then the cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quacking and quacking and quacking. So the cars are honking, but they want them to stop, and so they're quacking, hoping that they will stop so they can cross the street. They made such a noise that Michael, the police officer, came waving his arms and blowing his whistle. Look at Michael. He's saying, "Stop!" And they're still quacking. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross the street. So he stopped the street so all these ducklings and Mrs. Mallard could cross the street. That's silly. It's very nice of him to do. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down to Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. So there he goes. He's rushing back, and then way in the distance, you can see Mrs. Mallard with all the ducklings. It's cute. He called Clancy at the headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street, Clancy." "A family of what?" said Clancy. "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick!" It's on the phone. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street with Jack, Knack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Uack, Pack, and Quack, all marching in line behind her. Look at them. There's the bookstore, and all those people are coming to say hi. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud. She tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. Look how happy Mrs. Mallard is. And there all the ducks are, all the ducklings. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was a police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so that Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. There they go. 1, 2, 3, and the 4th police officer. That's awesome. Right into the public garden. They're going into the garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman, and the policeman smiled and waved goodbye. So there's the ducklings, and there's the policeman waving goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. And they're swimming to Mr. Mallard, who's right there on the rock. You can barely see him, but he's there. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long, they followed the swan boats and ate peanuts. So there's the swan boat. There's the ducks. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. They all go to sleep. The end. I hope you liked this springtime book. What's your favorite baby animal? Maybe you like puppies, or kittens, or baby sheep, or baby goats, or maybe you like ducklings. Let me know what your favorite baby animal is. My favorite is a kitten. I think kittens are cute. But let me know what yours is. Have a great night.